In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And so begins one of the greatest works of fiction in the English language. But what exactly are hobbits in Tolkien's world? Where do they come from, and what makes them special? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover Tolkien's legendarium in full, as well as other great fantasy worlds like A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher. If you're interested in seeing more, please click the subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen and the bell icon. The main protagonists in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are hobbits. They might be stories of great battles and mighty heroes, but it is the humble hobbits who prove most valuable. Other than Gandalf and Aragorn and a few others when they get to know them, they are usually overlooked, figuratively and literally, and underestimated. People often treat them as simple and childlike, like humans, but smaller and less important. So I suppose the first question we should ask is, are they just small humans? Tolkien sets out his answer in the prologue to The Lord of the Rings. It is plain indeed that, in spite of later estrangement, hobbits are relatives of ours, far nearer to us than elves or even than dwarves. Of old they spoke the languages of men after their own fashion, and liked and disliked much the same things as men did. But what exactly our relationship is can no longer be discovered. It's lost in the mists of time. What is clear, though, is that we're encouraged to think of hobbits as like humans, without being exactly the same. Perhaps in many ways they are idealised humans. Certainly the Shire is, in Tolkien's mind, a sort of idealised rural landscape, encouraging a simple, contented lifestyle of home and hearth and family. Not that hobbits started in the Shire. Their earliest records have them living in the Valley of Anduin, that land between the Misty Mountains and what we know as Mirkwood, but then was known as the Greenwood. There were three clear types of hobbit at the time. The Harfoots, who lived in hobbit holes cut into the sides of hills, and are most similar to what we think of as hobbits, with furry feet and the like. The Stors, who lived in marshy land and were stockier and happier in water, and the Fallowhides, who lived in the woods, were slightly taller on average and a bit more adventurous. These variety of hobbits carried on into the time of The Lord of the Rings, though less distinct after a couple of millennia of intermarriage. Presumably the Harfoots lived in the foothills of the Misty Mountains, the Stors next to the Anduin, and the Fallowhides under the eaves of the Greenwood. We don't know how long those communities lived there, though it was certainly many hundreds if not thousands of years, keeping to themselves and out of eyesight of the other races of Middle-earth. However, around the year 1050 of the Third Age, they all started moving westwards in groups large and small in search of a new homeland. The reasons are never made 100% clear, but the timing is very suggestive. At around this time, Sauron returned in secret, 1,000 years after his defeat at the end of the Second Age, setting up a base in Greenwood the Great, right next to where the hobbits were. He became known as the Necromancer. Quite soon his influence started to spread and the forest became populated by dark and sinister forces. Orcs and giant spiders took hold. The elves, who had once ruled over all of Greenwood the Great, retreated to a stronghold in the north of the forest. The forest itself became known as Mirkwood. Goblins started to move under the Misty Mountains, and the hobbits seemed to have sensed all this and headed west, seeking safety on the far side of the Misty Mountains. It's perhaps a tribute to their hobbity instincts. It would be many, many years before even Gandalf decided to investigate what was going on in Mirkwood, but the hobbits seemed to sense straight away that this was an evil that wasn't about to go away anytime soon. As an aside, it seems that although most of the hobbits left, some didn't. For it was here in the Anduin Valley centuries later that a Stor hobbit named Deagol found the One Ring while out fishing. It was taken from him by his cousin Smeagol, who was driven from his village, developed a hacking cough that made a sound like Gollum, and we know how that story goes. And when you think about it, it makes sense that Gollum was a Stor. He seemed perfectly at home paddling along in rivers and the like, and loved eating fish. Anyway, the main body of hobbits moved westwards. It was quite a leisurely migration that initially settled around the town of Bree and the human-occupied areas east of the Brandywine River, as well as some others who ended up in places like Dunland, Cardolan and Rudor. But in the year 1601 of the Third Age, which became known as Year 1 of the Shire Reckoning, they headed over the Brandywine and settled permanently in what we now know as the Shire, being swiftly joined by the wider diaspora of hobbits. It was largely abandoned farmland and hunting grounds, but still good fertile land. In doing so, the hobbits, nominally at least, agreed to pay allegiance to the kings of Arthedain, the northern human kingdom, and one of the three successor kingdoms to Arnor, for the land of the Shire was a part of that kingdom. Mostly, though, they kept to themselves. However, Arthedain was doomed to fall. The Witch King of Angmar had been remorselessly attacking the northern kingdoms for centuries, and the final battle, known as the Battle of Fornost, happened in the year 1975 of the Third Age. The hobbits insist that they sent a detachment of archers for this battle, though there is no record of that from anywhere else. The result of the battle was the defeat of the Witch King, but the end of the human northern kingdoms, and the hobbits of the Shire just carried on as they had done before. They appointed their own leaders, or thanes, and got on with their own business, ignoring and largely being ignored by the outside world for another 1,000 years or more. This was possible for a couple of reasons. First, although the Shire is large enough to be self-contained, so no real external trade or contact is needed, it isn't huge, perhaps 120 miles by 150. The land produces enough for all its inhabitants, and hobbits' natural lack of wanderlust means that they don't really travel far or trade much with anyone else. There was no need for any contact with the outside world, and the outside world had no need to go there. And second, although the hobbits were completely unaware of it, the Shire was being protected by the Dunedain, the Rangers of the North, descendants of the Kingdom of Arnor. The kingdom may have been destroyed, but the Rangers' sense of duty meant that they did not give up their responsibility to protect the free peoples of those lands. For centuries, Rangers were stationed around the outside of the Shire, and others patrolled the northern lands, hunting down and killing any threats. That's what Aragorn spent most of his life doing, incidentally, and why he knew that part of the world so well. And as a result, most people in Middle-earth had never heard of the Shire or of hobbits by the time of the Lord of the Rings. Hobbits had been isolated for over 1,000 years by then. Treebeard spends a long time trying to work out what Merry and Pippin are, because they don't fit into his memorised list of races, and even the Ringwraiths spend a lot longer than you might expect quizzing people about where hobbits might be found and where the Shire might be. Not that a millennium passed by without any intrusions on the Hobbits' peace. We know that the goblins invaded at least once, and the White Wolves entered the Shire during the fell winter of 2911. There was also the Great Plague, the Long Winter, and the Days of Dearth, each of which are pretty self-explanatory. The Long Winter perhaps deserves a bit of a mention, for it is when Gandalf started to take an interest in and develop a soft spot for the Hobbits, as he explains to Pippin. I began to have a warm place in my heart for them in the long winter, which none of you can remember. They were very hard put to it then, one of the worst pinches they have been in, dying of cold and starving in the dreadful dearth that followed. But that was the time to see their courage and their pity one for another. It was by their pity as much as by their tough, uncomplaining courage that they survived. I wanted them still to survive, but I saw that the Westlands were in for another very bad time again, sooner or later, though of quite a different sort. Pitiless war. To come through that, I thought they would need something more than they had now. It is not easy to say what. Well, they would want to know a bit more, understand a bit clearer what it was all about and where they stood, but you cannot teach that sort of thing to a whole people quickly. There was not time. And anyway, you must begin at some point with some one person. I dare say he was chosen, and I was only chosen to choose him, but I picked out Bilbo. So Gandalf decided to educate the people of the Shire about the wider world to prepare them for the coming war, and decided to start with Bilbo. This is clearly a good move given what happened. It's tempting to think of the Hobbits' involvement in the great events at the end of the Third Age as all rather accidental. Bilbo stumbled across the One Ring. Frodo was the compromise candidate to keep hold of it after Rivendell. Merry and Pippin were included in the Fellowship in order to make the numbers up to 9, and so on. But that's missing the point somewhat. The wise of Middle-earth, Gandalf, Elrond, Aragorn, and so on, deliberately put the Hobbits centre stage. And as Gandalf said, he was chosen as much as Bilbo was. You can sense the hand of Eru Ilúvatar, the one true god of Tolkien's legendarium, in all this. This is how Elrond put it. "If I understand aright all that I have heard," he said, "I think that this task is appointed for you, Frodo, and that if you do not find a way, no one will. This is the hour of the Shire folk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. Who of all the wise could have foreseen it? Or if they are wise, why should they expect to know it until the hour has struck?" We know what happened to Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin in The Lord of the Rings, but what about the Shire? Well, while our heroes were out saving the world, Saruman's ruffians took over, imprisoning good hobbits, cutting down good trees, and generally being terrible overlords. We often focus on the actions of Merry and Pippin in the scouring of the Shire at the end of the story, but it wasn't just them. Hundreds of hobbits fought, 19 died, and 30 more were wounded. After that, of course, Sam set to repairing the damage done, replanting the Shire, and the hobbits got back to living how they always had lived. Technically, now they were a free land within the reunited kingdom under Aragorn's rulership, and its lands were extended westwards for a way, but to most hobbits, most of the time, this probably mattered little. Aragorn ordered that none could enter the Shire without the hobbits' permission, and so their isolation continued. Tolkien makes clear in his prologue to The Lord of the Rings that hobbits do still exist today, still avoiding contact with humans, and still much like they were back then. So what are we to make of hobbits? Not just the heroic ones we know, but more generally. They are an expression of what is really important in life, and how there is a strength and power in that, sometimes despite all appearances. The Lord of the Rings does not lend itself well to allegorization, but the theme of simplicity and humbleness being the answer to power and hunger for power is very clear. This is most obvious in how Tolkien describes the One Ring. It is more powerful and more corrupting when held by the already powerful. Boromir is corrupted by just being near it. Galadriel undergoes a time of testing just by being offered it, and Gandalf, wisely, doesn't want to touch it at all. It is the hobbits' humility that protects them and makes them more resistant to it. They are the perfect race to carry it. Sauron's focus on power and strength is his undoing. He simply could not envisage creatures like hobbits making their way to Mount Doom, still less that they might want to destroy something through which they could do so much. J.R.R. Tolkien deliberately uses hobbits as likenesses of the best of humanity. They aren't perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination, but they are capable of astonishing acts of courage, loyalty, and friendship. Their way of life may not have been advanced, but it was happy and contented. We are supposed to look to hobbits and be challenged by them. What is it that we should truly aspire to? Power over others and strength in arms? Or friendships, family, and doing the right thing regardless? If you'd like to see more videos in the world of J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings, please click on the link to the playlist on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel or get access to some content I produce just for my patrons, please click on the link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.